we're on page 99. We're doing now the text of the Shemone Esrai, which means the silent prayer said 3 times a day on weekdays. Some of it said on holidays and Shabbos also, and that's the start that we're starting with. And we're doing a kind of microscopic presentation, word by word, phrase by phrase. And as we always say, with these texts, with Jewish texts, you're only skimming the surface because they're endlessly deep. So I would never say this is the meaning of the text. I would say this is a meaning of the text. People analyze it from different points of view. I have my point of view that I'm interested in. Others have different points of view, and they're all valid expositions of meaning of the text. Now, we have just finished our God and God of our forefathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. That's a kind of historical comment as to where we stand in relationship to God vis-a-vis the history of the Jewish people. Now we come to descriptions of God. In English, you have the great, mighty, the awesome God, the supreme God. So you notice that the word God is repeated twice. In the Hebrew, it starts off with the word for God, Ha'kel. Aleph Lamed is one of God's names. Then it gives 3 qualities, Gadol, Gibor, and Nora, which are translated as great, mighty, and awesome. And then it repeats the name again, Kel, and Elyon means high. Now, we have mentioned that names of God connote qualities. They're not like proper names, George, Frank. They're more like Miller, which names a person's activity or economics. He runs a mill, right? And here, if the same name is used twice, so that's going to be challenging. Why would it be used twice? And what do the other characteristics mean? So I'm going to give you an introduction to these characteristics, skimming the surface of some philosophical ideas and some Kabbalistic ideas. And I hope that will give these 5 occurrences here some understanding. First of all, the name Aleph Lamed connotes power. There are many verses in which that word just means power. Lavan says to Jacob, I have the power of my hand to do evil to you. Yesh le'el yadi, I have Aleph Lamed in my hand to do you evil. So Aleph Lamed connotes power. What power means vis-a-vis God and how it applies, we'll learn as we go on. Then it says Gadol. Your translator writes great. It's not bad, but let's trace it to its root. Gadol means big. In English, we talk. He's a big star. He's a big financier. We don't mean that he's 6'7" and weighs 240 pounds. It means in this particular activity, he's outstanding. Great is not a bad translation of it. This word and this quality of being great is associated with chesed, with loving kindness, which, as we have said, is the purpose of all creation. And I think it's possible to make a connection between the word big applied to the Creator and loving kindness. And I would do it in the following way. The word big is doubly relative. A big ant is not the same size as a big elephant. And a big ant is big among the ants. He's bigger than most of the ants. So when you say big, you first have to ask, big in what range? What kind of creature are you talking about? And then you have to size them up and see that this one is on the large end of the scale. So big is a doubly relative term. Could big be used as an absolute term? Something just big. Well, let's try this. Suppose something's growing. It grows a foot a day. Every day. Has always been growing a foot a day. And will continue to grow forever. Let's say time has no end. So how big is it? Well, you can say how big it is today. You can measure it today, and tomorrow it'll be bigger. But how big is it? Well, its size is growing all the time. Pick any number, pick any limit, sooner or later it will pass that limit. So since sooner or later it will pass every finite limit, or actually let me say any finite minute limit, no finite limit applies to what it is. This now is big in an absolute sense because it outstrips everything, unless something else is also growing moment by moment. Now, what is there that's going to grow moment by moment? So our picture of the world is that God created the world in order to benefit his creatures. We are the creatures who are going to receive that benefit, and that benefit goes on forever. It never stops. So if you think of the benefit that he's giving us as accumulating, then the size of the benefit is absolute. It's big absolute, not just big relative. That could be a way to build a bridge between the word gadol, which means big, and the attribute of loving kindness, which is what it is associated with in our literature. So when you describe God as gadol, meaning big, it means to describe him as a source of loving kindness. Your question?
Yeah, why then, if you say infinity is more correct definition, like applies to God, why just do not use the word eternal or infinite? Infinite code, like why would you specifically big, which is relativistic term?
Oh, so one second. First of all, I described what Aristotle would call a potential infinity. When you use the word infinity, you don't mean that. You mean Cantor's infinity, which is an absolute. I wasn't using that. So I mean something that's growing. Cantor's infinity isn't growing. It's a single set that has a certain size. I'm not talking about that. I taught transfinite mathematics for one of the things I used to teach, so I don't want that to get confused here. And then it's big induces a comparison, but it shows you that this transcends all comparisons. I think that's the mental move that you want to make. So that this quality, there are other qualities, God has other qualities, and other ways of interaction with the world. But this one outstrips all of them. The others are there, and they have a certain application, but this outstrips all of them. In many different ways, it outstrips all of them. So I think that also is induced, that comparison is induced. This quality alone is called big. The other qualities aren't called big. Well, then that means, in some sense, this is more fundamental, more present than the others are. And the truth is, it's bigger in quantity, but it's also the foundation of all the others. So in that sense, it gives the existence to all the others, which they don't have in their own. And it has its own existence as a starting point. In that sense, they all depend upon it. So that's loving kindness. Gibor, they translate as mighty. That's power. That's a tricky idea. God is powerful. What is power? What is power? Okay. Power is at least the capacity for force, right? What is force? When you want a definition of a term, you have to be careful not to define it in terms that are so closely related to it in meaning that if someone doesn't understand the one, he won't understand the ones you're using either.
So how can we describe it?
Well,
you can't measure force. You can only see the results of force.
Well, that's how you measure force. Yeah, you are measuring
I'm
force.
The thing itself you can't see. It's not tangible.
Right, but that doesn't mean you can't measure it.
The results of it you can measure.
I mean, what you're calling the results is what it is. So I don't think you can just distinguish the two of them. But force or power are the ability to overcome resistance. Right? My hand has power because it can overcome the resistance of gravity. Always, when you describe something as powerful, you're envisioning something standing in opposition, And you're saying that it can overcome that resistance. That's one way of describing what force and power are. Now, if we talk about wind that's forceful, or an army that's forceful, or a gravitational field like in a black hole that's forceful, understand what kind of force what kind of resistance it's overcoming. But to describe God as forceful, powerful, what is there that you might think of as resistance to God? And it's important to be told, there's resistance, but don't worry, he can overcome it. A galaxy? I mean, he creates the galaxies, thank you. It's a non-starter for him to have to overcome the resistance of a galaxy. What kind of resistance could you possibly imagine that it would be informative to be told that God has the power to overcome it? So now let me do something which is not obvious, but it is fundamental. This word, gibor, is not only used to describe God, it's also used to describe people. And maybe if we look at the use that the word has to describe people, we'll get a hint as to how it would be used to describe God. Well, one of the places, very famous place, Ezu Gibor, what person is worthy of the title of being mighty, strong? A kovesh yistro, one who conquers his own spirit. Here's a picture of internal resistance. We go through this all the time, because often when an option presents itself, we are what's called ambivalent. We have many different reactions to that option, some of which are attractive and some of which are repulsive. You have to make a decision, either you take it or you don't. And the part of you that evaluates and judges and makes decisions has to calculate the consequences and then make the decision. Whichever it decides, there's opposition, because part of you wants to take it and part of you wants to leave it behind. So if it decides to take it, the part that wants to leave it behind is against what you want. It's against what you're deciding. So you exercise your power in overcoming that part of you which is opposed to what you are deciding to do. That's what you call a human being as strong. Conquering a city or infecting other people is nothing compared to conquering your own spirit. That's I would call it, spiritual definition of power. Okay, now, this makes the problem even worse. I'm going to take that word, which means overcoming inner resistance, and apply it to the Creator. That doesn't sound right at all. How could there be any inner resistance within the Creator where he needs to overcome some part of himself? That sounds absurd. And I will admit that if you take a word and apply it to man and apply it to God, it would be fair to expect that it would have some differences, that it wouldn't have to mean the same thing. The subjects are so different. If the same word is applied, it may be applied in a different way with a different connotation. That certainly could be. But if you look at it Kabbalistically, you get a direct parallelism. And here's how it works. We use the word God, and we think of that as the name of some thing. And then we talk about the qualities of that thing. In particular, we talk about how it interacts with us. We spoke about loving kindness, we spoke about justice, we spoke about mercy. What do we know about God? What do we know about the agent behind the interactions? According to the Kabbalistic tradition and the philosophical tradition, we don't know anything about what God is. We only have information about what he does. He's transcendent is one word that's used. Our concepts don't apply to him. Our minds aren't fashioned in a way to understand what he is. So, when we talk about him, we are put in a position only of talking about what he does. That sounds kind of like an escape kind of intellectually irresponsible, kind of an obfuscation. What do you mean? If you can't talk about what he is, then how do you know anything about him at all? Maybe he isn't there, so forth and so on. Let me point out to you that fundamental science does exactly the same thing. Bertrand Russell pointed this out 120 years ago. An electron is described by what it does, not by what it is. Electrons are things that repel one another, things that are located in electron shells in the atom, things that are attracted to the positive charge of protons, things that have a certain mass, which means resistance to force of acceleration. That's all mass is. Mass is a resistance to the force of acceleration. All we describe in the fundamental picture of the universe is items which do these particular things. Above and beyond that, we don't have anything else to say. I hope that we're not going to therefore dismiss all of fundamental science as a kind of joke and an escape and anti-intellectual and so on and so on. We're probably not going to do that, right? And when you come to particles, if you have learned any quantum mechanics, we describe what they do, but there's no description of what they are. None at all. Because they do things which can't be done by things that we understand. And I'm quoting now the most famous scientists of all time. So there too, I can tell you what will happen if I do an experiment. I can give you statistics. We can check the outcome. But what is the thing that's doing the outcome? There's no answer to that question. So if God is on a par with fundamental qualities and fundamental building blocks of nature, I don't think that's so terrible intellectually. So now, when we talk about God, we said that the names of God connote qualities. Now we're getting a little closer, it's a little deeper now. Not that they happen to also connote qualities, but that's all they connote. Because what has the qualities is beyond our ability to grasp altogether. So now we have qualities. Well, some of these qualities conflict with other qualities. These qualities are principles of action, and in a particular circumstance, one quality would say the outcome should be X, the other quality would say the outcome should be Y. Which means you have an internal conflict within God's qualities of actions, just like you have an internal conflict within human psychology. So we see now what's the mathematicians call an isomorphism. There's a similarity of structure between the two, and then when there's a struggle between the two, and one has to dictate the outcome, it has to overcome the other one. Think of mercy. We spoke about mercy in the last couple of days. What is mercy? Well, someone's done something wrong. He's guilty. Justice says that he should be punished in a certain way, but we have a reason that it shouldn't be done. According to justice, it should be done, but there are other factors, extenuating circumstances. Give him a second chance. He needs to be detoxified from drugs before you can expect reasonable behavior from him. Okay. So then we're going to either withhold justice temporarily, or we're going to modify justice, as we said yesterday. That means strict justice has to be overcome. It can't be allowed to function on its own in terms of its own definition. So there is an internal conflict here. So describing Kodesh Baruch Hu as Gibor can mean that when there's a conflict among these principles of action and one takes precedence, it takes precedence by overpowering the other one. Now this is a very, very deep idea. This describes the world as a position, as a circumstance over which God's own principles of actions are conflicted. And this happens to parallel to human beings also. When you have children, you'll have conflicts like this all the time. Because children are programmed to create these conflicts. Child A has hit child B, and child A needs to be punished in some way, but the child will cry and will plead and will hold his breath and go unconscious and bang his head on the floor. They've been equipped with all sorts of things that make it very difficult for parents to punish them. And the sympathy that the child elicits in the parent sometimes has to be overcome, because it won't be good for the child if the child never faces the consequences of what he's done and learned that he has to behave in a different way. So, the mighty here is the idea of in the operation of these different modes of action, when there are conflicts, one has to take precedence over the other. That would be a way of applying this term to the Creator. Now that's loving kindness is one mode of action, the fundamental one out of which the creation comes, and mighty refers to adjudicating between the many modes of action that are present. The last one is awesome, Nora. What is awe? You know, it's become a throwaway word nowadays. That's awesome. You know, said like a chimpanzee would say. What does it mean when you call something awesome? When you see someone who's awestruck. What does that mean?
You have a certain amount of respect and honor for the thing in the moment.
Okay, there's a certain respect for the thing, a certain honor for the thing, which certainly means that if it's awesome, it's got to be positive. We wouldn't speak of an awesome villain, right? An awesome destroyer. I don't think we would speak of an awesome tornado.
They're not discussing what in the
We can have a discussion on this one.
What's that?
There are some movie villains that are pretty awesome.
Yeah, but I think there what it means is their performance is awesome, not their character is awesome.
Both? Well, because depends on who they are, but some of them have really good reasons.
Okay, then they're not villains.
He means like Robin Hood.
Well,
The-
Villain, but
no,
If you kill somebody in self-defense, then you're not a villain. At any rate, awe is a sense of something being very, very outstanding, and outstanding in a positive way. So, you know, it couldn't be that everyone was awesome. That would misuse the word. So if we're talking about God being awesome, there's got to be something about God which is, and we're using the word, we're saying the word, so it's got to mean something to us. It can't be a blank when we say it. It's got to be something which elicits awe from us. Now, the traditional explanation is there's a combination of loving kindness on the one hand and the quality of might, and that combination elicits awe. And this is something we spoke about with respect to the patriarchs, and I'm going to say it again because it's a very fundamental Jewish idea. Let's take loving kindness and strict justice. Loving kindness and strict justice contradict one another. At least in a single interaction, it's impossible to be expressing both loving kindness and justice. I'll give you an example. A gives to B $500. Why are you doing that? Two possible answers. It's his birthday. It's his birthday. I'm helping him celebrate. Give him $500, right? Was that an expression of justice? Did A owe B the money? Could B have claimed the money? Would B have been a victim if A didn't give it to him? No, it's a pure gift. Giving a pure gift isn't justice. It can be kindness, but it can't be justice. Now you say, why did A give me $500? A says, we signed a contract, and I told him, every week that he works, he gets $500. He worked the week, I owed him the $500, and I paid it to him. That's justice. You signed the contract, you have to pay. But there's no kindness in it. He worked for the week, he earned it, and he owes it to him, and he's paying off his debt. So you can't have justice and loving kindness in the same interaction. Still, in our picture of the world, justice grows out of loving kindness and can be operating simultaneously. I said twice in the same interaction, so maybe you're already hearing the clue that maybe they're operating simultaneously but not in the same interaction. And here's a standard example. Charity comes in many levels. Maimonides has 8 different levels of charity. The top level of charity, the absolute best type of charity, is to give someone a job or give someone the ability to earn a living. Why would that be the best type of charity?
Because then they can take care of themselves and not need more charity.
Okay, so then they can take care of themselves and not need more charity. And that means in addition to giving them money to live on, you're also giving them what?
Self-satisfaction.
Self-satisfaction, self-respect.
Self-sufficiency you give them.
Sorry?
They would be able to be self-sufficient, not to rely on others.
Right, but I'm saying that's like an economic truth about them. But what you're giving to them personally, you are giving them an opportunity to live in such a way that they have self-esteem. So people, I know there are certain communities of people who aren't like this, but I think they have some kind of psychological weakness. Most people, if they have to be dependent upon somebody else, don't like it. They don't like it. Babies are like that. Babies don't want you to tie their shoes. They want to tie their shoes. And they'll twist it and twist it and twist it over and over again until they get the ability to tie it. They want to do it on their own. So the highest level of charity is to give a person an opportunity to earn. Now let's suppose this is done by giving a job. So now, what kind of relationship is a job? We talked about that. We signed the contract. Comes to the end of the week, he worked, I pay him $500. That's justice. The kindness is in giving him the job. The job is an ongoing relationship of justice. This is how kindness can give rise to justice, give birth to justice. Even though in a single interaction, kindness and justice contradict one another, they're not incompatible. It's not as if you have kindness, you can't have justice also. But the justice has to be expressed, the kindness has to be expressed in a particular way. So that being the case, it's the kindness that underlies the justice. It's the kindness that's the reason for the justice. The reason why I give him a job is because I want him to be in the best possible condition. And being in the best possible condition means that we should have a relationship of justice. This makes the kindness much more fundamental than the justice, as I said before, but I'm saying it in more detail. Now, when you are told that kindness is the principle of the whole of the creation, that means everything that's in the creation has to be ultimately traced back to kindness in one way or another. It's all organized on one principle. Even things which, in their immediate perception, don't look like they're expressions of kindness. You see a man carrying his 4-year-old by holding his jacket, and the kid is bawling his eyes out, and he's walking along carrying the child. That doesn't look good. That looks cruel. The child is clearly suffering. If you had seen 10 frames earlier on the film, you would have seen that the child was in the middle of the street, and a car was bearing down on him. And the father picked him up and pulled him off the street. And the child was crying because he's frightened. Yeah, but I didn't see that part. Right, you didn't see that part. There are things in the world that happen in the world that don't look to us like kindness. If we would see what came before, and we'd see what the consequences would be, we would see that they are the underlying reality is the reality of kindness. Well, if you're going to be told that the whole of history, the whole of creation is based on kindness, that's a challenging idea. There are lots of parts of it where that's not obvious at all. If you are induced to believe it because you hear it from an authority whom you trust, you're getting an introduction to an awesome idea. To think that that's true in our world is an awesome idea. And that's one way of describing what it means to call the Creator awesome. Yes, you had a question.
I was just a little confused on the precise definition of meaning for justice in this case. It's just, it sounds like it's what a result of a particular action, like it's a consequence that will fulfill the, like what are you defining as justice in this case? The job, like the job is justice. What do you mean?
I mean that the interactions in a job where a person works and gets paid for it, the interactions are based on justice. When you pay the worker at the end of the week, you pay him because you owe it to him, because it's his by right, because he has a claim on it, because if you don't give it to him, you're victimizing him. Those are all descriptions of justice. But giving him the job, you didn't owe him the job. And what are you giving him to give him the job? You're giving him an ongoing justice relationship. So here's where the thought of kindness motivates the instituting of a justice relationship, which means that there are ways to put kindness and justice together, even though in singular actions they are contradictory. There's a deep logical point here.
Would that imply, I guess, by the nature of our world, that the deepest kindness is always ongoing justice?
100%. The kindness is always ongoing. And that's where the awesomeness comes from. Because when you look around and there are things that you see which are very difficult to interpret in terms of kindness, and you're being told, were you to see it more deeply, see its antecedents, see its consequences, then you would see that it is kindness.
So that would extrapolate to all the mitzvahs, the daily mitzvahs that Hashem gives us, the kindness that He's giving to us.
That's right. Ultimately, all of the mitzvos have as their function to produce some kind of kindness. That's true. That's true. Again, which isn't to say there aren't other... justice is a different quality. But justice is in the service of kindness. Justice is in the service of kindness. Now, having said all of that, let me add in one more logical distinction, which I think underlies a lot of this thought, and other things as well. You see somebody doing something, and you don't understand why he's doing it. So you ask him, why are you doing that? And he says, because B. Because I want to accomplish B. Those words, as simple as they are, have two different meanings, two really importantly different meanings. I'll illustrate it for you. You see me building a tower in my backyard. Tower in his backyard. Wonder why he's doing that. Gottleib, why are you building a tower in your backyard? I said, listen, you see that hill over there? I want to be able to see over that hill. When my tower is finished, when I climb up on top, I'll be able to see over the hill. Good, so I'm building the tower as a means to an end. The end is being able to see over the hill. Fine. Second case, you see me building a tower in George's backyard. That's really strange. So you say, Gottlieb, why are you building a tower in George's backyard? I said, I'll tell you why. Because George recently did me a tremendous favor. And I'm very grateful to him. And I happen to know that he wants a tower in his backyard. And I happen to know that he and his family are on vacation in the Bahamas, and they're on for a month. And it'll only take me 2 weeks to build the tower, so I'm building the tower in order to repay his favor. Let's think about that. What's the relationship between building the tower and repaying the favor? Aren't they exactly the same thing? When I finish building him the tower, he now has a tower, I have paid back the favor. It isn't that building the tower is a means to the end of repaying the favor. It's just two descriptions of the same thing. And because you only knew one description and didn't know the other description, you don't know why it's being done. In the case of building a tower in my backyard, I might finish in the middle of the night when I can't see over the hill, and I'll wait till sunrise so I can see over the hill. I finished building the tower, the means, at nighttime, and the end took place in the morning, hours later. But it's not like that. When he asked me why am I building a tower in George's backyard, and I say in order to repay the favor is building the tower in his yard where he wants it. I'll give you another example. Maybe this will be even simpler. Someone's standing there and he waves his hand and I shoot him. What's the matter with you? Why did you shoot him? All he did was wave his hand. I said, no, he's signaling the spy. I can't let him signal the spy. Oh, because waving his hand was signaling the spy. And I can't allow this signal to go through to the spy. So sometimes we answer why something's being done by giving another description of what's being done, not to say it's for the sake of something else, which is a goal. And sometimes it is a goal. So now if I say that everything, that chesed underlies everything, loving kindness, do I mean, well, when you do this now, the result 6 years from now will be loving kindness? Or do I mean that what I'm doing now is loving kindness? You just don't see why it's loving kindness. So let's take this in the case of children. Take that child who's running out into the street. and the father grabs him and pulls him out of the street. So surely this is a means to a future end. When he's 4 now, when he's 7, he'll be able to cross the street by himself and he won't get hit by a car. It definitely benefits him 3 years from now. But isn't it kindness, concern, love, and care for the child that's motivating the father now? What the child needs now is this training. If he doesn't get this training, he's going to be crippled. I'm doing the kindest thing that I can do for him now by giving him the training that he needs now in order that later he'll be benefited also. So it isn't as if I'm doing something now out of cruelty or out of indifference, but it'll have good consequences later. No, the kindest thing to do to the child now is to give him the training now, because now is when he needs it. So I think that when we talk about loving kindness being the basis for all the other qualities and all the other things that happen, it's this much tighter relationship. If you would be able to see what's going on here, you would see that it's coming out of kindness. It's expression of kindness. And that's one way of putting what's awesome about God. And he's running this, so to speak, 2-track system. The Ramchal, Moshe Chaim talks about Gidui HaYichud, for those who know, where there's a kind of open set of rules that are running the way the world runs, but there's an underlying motivation, and really, if you could see the totality of what's going on, you would see the underlying motivation in the open set of rules. It's just very hard to see. Okay? Now, the next phrase in the Shemone phrase, Kel Elyon, this is the same name again of power, and now it says above, on high. So now, if you have a modification, you have the name Aleph Lamed at the beginning of this phrase, and now you have the same name with on high. That means that sometimes it's on high and sometimes it isn't. When we started the phrase, we had Aleph Lamed without on high, and now we have Aleph Lamed with on high. So obviously, Aleph Lamed can apply in a variety of circumstances, and when you see it, you have to identify where it's supposed to apply. Well, the name for power in this sense is also associated with loving kindness, and this kind of loving kindness it applies in various different levels. You ask somebody, why are you doing that with respect to that child? And he says, look, he was in danger and I saved him. Why are you doing that with respect to that child? Because he's got to go through training now, so 3 years from now, he'll be safe. Why are you doing that with respect to that child? Because I'm his father. That's a different answer. They could all be true, but they're different aspects. The first two could be true if I'm not his father. If I'm his father, it's an entirely different quality. I have a responsibility for him because he's my child, which I don't have for some other person's child who I might stop and correct once or twice, but I'm not going to make a project out of it. I have a love for my child, which I typically don't have for other people, and it's an expression of that love of a father for a child that's leading me to do what I'm doing for the child. So in all cases there's kindness, but the quality of kindness is different depending upon what level it's coming from. And this word, Aleph Lamed, can go up and down the levels. Kel Elyon is at least referring to the idea that we are HaKadosh Baruch Hu's creatures, and he has the commitment of a creator for his creatures, which we describe as a father for his children. That's much deeper and goes beyond the idea of there being a project for the creation, something it's supposed to achieve, and we have a role in achieving it, and that maybe that role is good for us. All of that could be true, but that doesn't yet say that he's a father as for children. And that Kel Elyon goes up to that kind of level, where the power is that of a father who's committed to his children. This is part of what generates mercy. I mentioned to you the other day ancient statues of justice are blindfolded. Why? Because the concept that is being communicated is there are rules, there are laws, the laws have to apply equally to everyone. Nothing else about the person is relevant other than what he did and what the laws are. In particular, imagine that the judge is the father of the accused. That's going to be very tough. His own child is on trial. His own child has to be decided upon in what way he's going to be treated. So the person is going to be struggling with the two roles, being fair to justice and also being father. Now, in our case, the two roles are intertwined. Some of you know that there's a famous prayer which says 30 times, "Our Father, our King, Avinu Malkeinu." We recite that prayer on very important time, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, fast days. That phraseology is found elsewhere in the prayers. Our Father, our King. It's never reversed. Never. That's because the Kodesh Baruch Hu's relationship to us ultimately is Father, and King is a role that he plays as Father in order for us to have the benefits that we need to have. So King is secondary to Father. And that's one of the places where mercy comes from. Because mercy is on the justice level of King. The King's laws have been violated. The King functions as an executive branch to punish violations. Mercy comes from the Father level. It's as if you say to the judge, "You're right, I broke the law. You're right, the law prescribes certain punishment for breaking the law. But you're my Father." In the application of pure justice, as a blindfold, doesn't make any difference whether you're Father or not. Justice doesn't take that into account. Shouldn't take that into account. That's right. But in our case, the judge, the King, is our Father. And he's playing the role of King in order to act out what he wants to accomplish as Father. That's why you can appeal for mercy. So that's the idea of Aleph Lamed operating on various levels. And the type of kindness that you're talking about varies from level to level. And when you say Kiel Elyon, you're going to a very high level, maybe the highest level. Okay? There's a little bit of Jewish theology right here in the Siddur. Now, the next words, if we pay careful attention, express one of the ideas that we've been talking about. Who bestows beneficial kindnesses. Chasadim tovim. Beneficial kindnesses. Is there any other kind? Isn't the kindness something that benefits you? That's what kindness is. If it doesn't benefit you, it's not a kindness. Could there be kindnesses that aren't beneficial? So one of the commentators says here what we said about a blessing in disguise. What did we say about a blessing in disguise?
Just a blessing.
What is a blessing?
Something that is beneficial, good for you.
Something that's really good for you. But we have a blessing in disguise means when it happened, I sure didn't like it.
Yeah.
I wished it wouldn't happen. I really felt bad about it. Only 5 years later did I realize that it was really good for me. There are numerous famous cases of people missing the plane. And then the plane goes down. Instead of cursing the cab driver for taking the wrong route, not following ways and getting into a jam, he says, "Thank God that I didn't make that flight because I would have been dead." So here we're talking about kindnesses that wear their character on the sleeve. You see right away that it's a kindness. In the next blessing, we'll have references to kindnesses that don't show themselves as kindnesses on the spot. But here we're talking about things where the kindness in it is open and obvious. Okay? That's why the adjective here is not just redundant.
Could you say it's just us admitting our blindness? It's all good.
Say it again?
It's just a matter of our scope of our sight. It's not having to do with what a root or with a blessing that one is really
Sure, exactly. It has a matter to do with our scope. I'll tell you what, when my oldest son was, I don't know, 8 years old or something, he asked me a question. He said, why should we be grateful to God for creating us and putting us in this world and imposing the Torah on us? We didn't ask for it. And the Mishnah says, if we had been asked, we would have said no. Why should I be grateful for something which was imposed upon me when I didn't want it? And I said, that's a good question. I'll think about it. And I came back to him. I said, listen, when you were 4 years old, we had a rule. You can't eat dinner unless you wash your hands. You weren't very happy about that rule. You can hear the 4-year-old talking to his friend. My father is prejudiced against brown. I don't know what. My hands are brown. So what? It's just like it's a color, you know. They could be blue, they could be pink, they could be brown. No, he's got to wash off the brown. He has this ritual that he's very committed to. Yeah, it looks arbitrary, looks unreasonable. Do you expect the child when he's 11 and learns about infection and bacteria and viruses and all the rest, do you expect him to express gratitude to his father for what the father imposed on him when he was 4? I think you do, because now he understands what the father was doing. His opposition was only due to the fact that he didn't understand what it meant. So the scope of vision is crucially important here. And now you can appreciate a little bit why we have a childhood period. Because if you go through a childhood period, you're going to go through this experience numerous times where your parents tell you to do something and you don't see any reason in it, and 2 or 3 years later you see that it really was good for you. And what you get used to is there are things that are good for me which I don't appreciate. And then when you're 22 and you're doing a mitzvah and you don't see an immediate benefit from doing the mitzvah, you're used to this dynamic, yeah, but there could be a hidden benefit that I'm not aware of. I learned that when I was 11. And when the creator of the universe says, I only have in mind your benefit, and this is for your benefit, and trust me, in the end you'll look back and you'll thank me for having done it. That has credibility. That has credibility because you've been through it yourself. Yeah.
Would that imply that you would ruin the benefit of the imposition by telling the child the reason? Is that why we have chukim in a way?
That's an interesting question.
Does that bring value? Not having a reason and just trusting? What is that about? I know it's kind of
It's an interesting question. I think in part that I would agree with that. A person has to learn to trust those who are worthy of trust. When I was your age, and I was a rebellious college student, like all the other, well, I'll save the adjectives. We had a slogan: "Don't trust anybody over 30." Yeah, but the food you eat is processed by people over 30, and the airline pilot whom you're flying your plane is over 30, and the people who write the textbooks that you're reading in order to get a degree are over 30. So do you really mean don't trust anyone over 30? Really mean that? It's like people say to the DBS people, don't use Israeli products. Well, throw out your computer, throw out your car, throw out your calculating system and everything, because a lot of these things, Intel chips are made here, right? Are you going to throw out everything with Intel chips? Maybe not. So I think that learning to trust is a very important feature of life. Just imagine a person who says, I don't trust anybody, I check everything out for myself. Really? And now you go to the doctor, and he says you have symptoms of such and such a disease, and you need this medication. Sorry, doctor, I don't take your word for it. So you're going to spend 6 months learning physiology and infectious diseases, and 6 months learning the chemistry of the medicine before you take it. You might not be alive. Life is based. You take in your car for a tune-up, and then you drive out, and you drive it. You don't say, put me in the desert for 2 hours so I can make sure that he didn't ruin the motor. You don't do that. You're trusting people all the time. You're driving on the road, right? You're trusting all the other drivers not to crash into you. What do you mean you don't trust? Of course you trust. So then the question is, whom to trust and all the rest. But a person who is so suspicious that he won't trust anybody is going to have a crippled life if he has any life at all.
In comparison to Judaism, like we have a bit distorted system. For example, it's like a doctor that accepts 100 patients, and you go, the first one tells, trust me, that's a good doctor. He goes in, doctor gives him medicine, this patient dies. Another 99 don't go to the doctor, and nothing wrong goes with them or like out of abnormality. Like Jews, 0.5% of the population, and we constantly go through so many troubles, and same people that trust God. So,
well, it's an interesting question. It has certain depth to it, but let me just give you a little thing to think about. This actually was done in the Holocaust, and after the Holocaust, they asked Jews who were victims, if you had the opportunity, would you have traded your place with the German? To be killing Jews instead of dying? Not one said yes. Not one. So I think we had a benefit. We were better than they. And we don't think of having a good life just in terms of the number of ice cream cones per week we eat. The question is maximizing our potential, doing things that are really important, noble, ideal. People who have done things, even things that maybe we would aspire to, require a lot of hard work. I was just listening to Yitzhak Perlman playing the violin. He's crippled, but he's one of the world's greatest violinists. That wasn't easy for him. It's just this guy now who Starlink put in a chip in his brain. You heard about that? Elon Musk's. Yeah, so he's now started to produce language. And he said, this wasn't difficult for me. I wasn't suffering. He had some freak accident and paralyzed from the neck down, and he couldn't speak. He was totally out. Because he's not Jewish, but he said, I trust in God, and I was putting together the dots. I've been here and I've done this, and this is now what's happening to me. And I could see that there was a kind of coherence to the whole picture. And that being the case, I wasn't suffering. I wasn't in pain. So I think that looking at it just from the point of view, I'll give you one more example. I did some athletics when I was a kid. One thing I used to run the 440 race, and the coach had to do exercises, of course. The coach was an anti-Semite. And because of that, there were a few of us on the team who were Jewish, and he made us do extra push-ups and extra sit-ups.
But at the end of the day, it benefits you.
Of course!
There we go.
In addition to being vicious, he was also a dope, because that improved our athletic abilities. So, when you see something like that, you think, okay, this is happening to me, and it's not happening to the other guy, but maybe we're better off that this is happening to us than what's happening to them. So you can't measure it in just simplistic terms that an 11-year-old will say, I choose that because it got more ice cream. It's much deeper than that. Much more, much deeper than that.
And the problem we cannot see, Lama Ba, and sometimes in this world, picture is not looking well presented for us.
So I think that you have to say two things. One is take into account the totality of the picture. I don't know if you read poetry or not. There's a wonderful poem. I think the author was British, called Richard Cory, and you can look it up. And the point of the poem is Richard Cory has money and he has family and he has power and so forth and so on, and all the praises are going on stanza by stanza. And the end of the last stanza is, and one night Richard Cory went home and put a bullet in his brain. Stop and think, really? All those external things somehow weren't really satisfying him. They weren't really building him up. It wasn't reaching the part of him that really... we have people who became religious because they hit the top of their field at age 27 and said, that's all? There's nothing more than that? That's all that life is? What looks so rosy from the outside, when you're in the inside and you have it, can look trivial and unimportant. So they ask Rabbi Sinclair. He was the top producer for a rock band and found it to be unsatisfying in the end. Okay.
I